Good evening, Golden. I am Mayor Laura Weinberg. I'm here tonight with our city manager, Jason Slowinski. And of course, we are back here for a COVID-19 live briefing. There's, as always, more to discuss and some more changes. We do welcome your questions, and we will get to those in a few minutes. I just wanted to start out first, more generally. COVID case numbers continue to increase, as do deaths from COVID. The last numbers that I saw a little bit earlier this afternoon, there have been over 137,000 COVID deaths in the country and over 1,600 here in Colorado. Each of those numbers represents a person and a family who has lost a loved one. It is important when we discuss policy, when we discuss enforcement of the policy, when we discuss changes, that we remember the people behind the actions that we take. On July 9th, Golden City Council passed an ordinance requiring face coverings, and Jefferson County Public Health followed on July 14th for the entire county. Today, in the news, we learned that Walmart and Kroger, the parent of King Soopers, are requiring face coverings for all stores across the country. Jefferson County Public Schools and Colorado School of Mines have announced that they will welcome students to their campuses 40 days from now, on August 24th. They will also have face coverings and distancing requirements. We can still get the virus under control. It's the same guidance that we've been receiving from public health and giving out for the past 4 months. It hasn't changed. Stay home if you do not feel well. When you leave your home, distance from others, wear a mask, and wash your hands. Our students, our Golden businesses, our community are depending on each person to do their part. 4 months ago, when things first began shutting down, many of us thought it would be short-term, and then things would get back to normal. It is now 4 months later, and the realization is settling in that the change is lasting, and we need to adjust our expectations and behaviors. I understand that change is difficult. Change that comes all at once and comes from something outside of our control can be scary. This change, however, is happening to all of us at the same time. I have heard others say, and I appreciate this particular saying, we are all in the same storm, but not in the same boat. Please reach out and help those whose boats are a little less secure than your own, whose experience is a little more scary. We can still come together as a Golden community and come through this Golden strong. A large part of Council's discussions regarding face coverings over the past months have been about gaining compliance, creating that mask culture, and about enforcement. We have looked at our internal operations and looked at other cities for examples. Our emphasis has been on gaining compliance through communication, followed by education for people in violation. With the passing of our ordinance, we now have the opportunity for citations at the discretion of the police. I am going to turn things over to our city manager to discuss more about city operations and other updates on what is happening in the city of Golden. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you're, as always, staying safe, and we appreciate you tuning in to listen to this update and also for your questions that we'll get to in a second here. A lot of questions about creek access and enforcement, and so I'll address that to start. just prior to the holiday, July 4th holiday weekend, we put into place an administrative order restricting access to Clear Creek from our City of Golden property along the creek. And that was done in anticipation of the large crowds that we would see over the holiday weekend, which Golden is accustomed to seeing on that holiday, and the lack of social distancing that we have been seeing the past few previous weekends. And so that continues to be a concern of ours. We are currently looking at ways that we can try to restore some level of access to the creek without encouraging the large gatherings that are the subject of the concern. So where councils and our internal staff discussions have been centered around is how do we provide that appropriate balance between allowing for some recreation of the creek. We know it's a beloved asset here in Golden, and we want to try to do that. We know, recreation is a high priority for our city council, and for our citizens, but how do we do it in a way that's safe and that we can accommodate recreation and the different types of uses along the creek corridor and in the water itself without further risking group gatherings and public health. So it's a tough balance, and I will tell you there's no easy answer to it or solution. If there was, we'd have it in place already. Part of it is going to be trial by error, and we'll continue to make adjustments as we move forward. This week, we're looking at how we can possibly start providing some access for certain uses in the creek. I intend to meet with some of the tubing rental companies and others. We've had a lot of suggestions come in from the public through email and other mechanisms. We've collected those suggestions. I kind of reviewed last week with City Council a number of the suggestions that have come in. We'll continue to collect others. We've looked at it internally, and we're looking at ways that we can provide that access, but still be in line with what the public health requirements are to maintain safety for our community. And the other question, related question, is the enforcement of it. One of the challenges of closing creek access or even limiting uses in the creek is how do we enforce that? And again, another difficult question. When you have small town resources, as we do in our police department, we can't have every officer positioned along the creek to enforce all public health orders or creek closures at all times of the day in the weekend. That happens to be one of our busier times throughout the city, and we have many more higher priority calls in our police department throughout the city, things that I know our residents would want us to respond to, vehicle break-ins, sex assaults, those kind of things, and those are always going to take priority over mask wearing and creek closure. That said, there is certainly room for improvement, and we're going to continue to do that. This past weekend, we did not issue any citations through our police department, but we did have a number of, probably close to 24 verbal warnings that we issued to folks along the creek for various violations. And our approach this past weekend was a bit on the softer side, considering that these were new regulations put into place, particularly the emergency mask ordinance. So as we move forward, you'll see that we'll likely step up our action on that a bit more, perhaps not give as many warnings. Again, it's in the discretion of our park rangers and police officers to handle this situation accordingly. But they're also aware of the situation and the fact that we have folks that this past weekend have certainly blatantly violated some of the signs and regulations that we have in place. So we're going to make some adjustments going forward, probably from week to week on what it looks like. We've had some success with that strategy on Washington Avenue to help out our business community, and we continue to make adjustments there as well. So we'll communicate those changes as we have them. But that's one area that I know is of interest to folks and is certainly on our mind as well. I will say, some of the questions that we have gotten this past week have been about, well, people are not wearing masks along the creek, or there are people in the water. Those are not technical violations of our ordinance, the emergency ordinance put into place by council, nor are they violations of the administrative order. The violation is the accessing the creek from our public property. There are folks who have accessed it different ways that are not in violation of the order. Similarly, on the mask requirement, you can walk down Clear Creek Trail without a mask legally if you are maintaining separation from other folks along the trail. So yes, we would prefer that everybody wear their mask all the time, but certainly the language as drafted and passed by City Council in the emergency order does allow for folks to take their mask off or not have it covering their face if they are maintaining that separation. Now, what I can tell you on the mask compliance front, one of the things that we've started to do is collect a little bit more data related to mask compliance. We've been doing it for about a week and a half now. And we've done it both downtown and along the creek corridor and the trail, Clear Creek Trail. And in both of those locations, we've seen increasing compliance in the week and a half we've been doing it. And I know it's early data yet, and it's hard to draw conclusions from a short period of time. But what I can report to you is that, early on in the first couple of days that we started doing this compliance data gathering, we saw in the low 80% of compliance downtown, and we're at the location of 12th and Washington is where we're checking compliance, and then about 55% along the creek corridor, and the location we've been using is by Golden History Museum and Library area. So that has improved. Our latest data from the past day, where we were in these locations, showed 94% downtown and about 87% along the creek. So we've gone in the right direction. And I hope that folks will continue to comply and do that. Jefferson County's mask mandate, face covering mandate will also help that. I think as folks come to our community from surrounding communities and visitors, if they have an understanding that it's required in our community and also in our county in general, that will help our situation as well. So we're going to continue to work on it and try to build greater compliance on the mask requirement, and also work on making additional adjustments to the creek access situation so that we can start allowing some uses in the creek, but we need to do so in a responsible way so that we're maintaining public health compliance and not encouraging gatherings that could potentially present more of a dangerous situation for not only our residents but our visitors as well. So stay tuned on that. I just wanted to touch base on and talk a little bit about our strategy there and what we're thinking about. Today I met with our technology director as well as our police chief. One of the things we'll be doing is looking at introducing some additional technology possibilities that will help us better understand in a real-time situation what's happening along the creek corridor. It'll potentially make policing that or enforcing regulations a bit more efficient. We have, as I said at the outset, we have a limited number of staff who are available to do this. And by allowing them some access to potentially some interesting technology, it will help them be more efficient in how they can observe what's happening and responding to that. So stay tuned for that. We'll certainly put out information as we make adjustments along the creek corridor, and we hear the concerns and questions from the community and we share those same concerns, but we want to make sure that we put the right measures into place as we move forward. Other city operations, we've started, I think since our last briefing, operating Splash, the lap pool's open, and the community center as well. You can start accessing those facilities by reservation only. Not every function in those facilities is available or open, but there are ways that you can access those facilities. So please check our website for details on that and how to make a reservation if you have an interest in that. And we continue to be open here at City Hall by appointment only as well. And the status of all of our city services is updated online. So if you have specific questions about something, please check there at Guiding Golden, or feel free to call our office and we'll be happy to direct you in the right way. And just lastly, I was on some information updates today with Department of Public Health for the state, as well as Department of Local Affairs. A couple of things I wanted to just mention that were important points in their briefing. One, the governor extended the executive order on evictions, and that goes to August 12th. And that, again, is to help folks who may be in that situation not to be evicted from their home. And the order, I believe, requires an additional notice period for that to take place. So that is in place. We've kind of, in the last month or so, I want to make sure it's still on our radar screen, because I know it is for the state as well. Be mindful of the ongoing 2020 census, which has we mentioned many times in past months. It was reported today by the state. We have a 65.4% response rate in Colorado, which is higher than the national average. And starting in August, the second week of August, census workers are going to be back out and about in the community to help get that rate higher. And we'll be, of course, wearing masks and doing the appropriate distancing, but you'll start seeing those show up in a few weeks here. And then lastly, an interesting thing for those who want to better understand the impact of masks and what that looks like on modeling and the future of projections and estimates of what the COVID-19 situation looks like in the months ahead. CDPHE has just put together a new modeling website. It is coronavirusmodel.com. And it allows you to adjust various inputs on percentage of compliance on mask wearing and social distancing and all those types of things. And you can play with the levers and understand what happens to the curve over the months ahead and how that compares to our hospital capacity. So it's a pretty interesting model they built, and if you have any interest in that, please check that out. I looked at it briefly today and thought it was kind of a cool thing that the state put together. So that's coronavirusmodel.com. And I believe that was the last update I had. I know we had some questions that have come in. So Mayor, if you didn't have anything else, we can jump to questions. I know we had 3, and then, of course, if you have a question now, if you're sitting at home watching this, feel free to reach out to us, Facebook Live or COVID-19@cityofgolden.net. One of the questions that I got, actually 2 questions are related from both Bill and Douglas on the enforcing and communicating around the mask ordinance, and then also the creek access. So I think I addressed that a bit in my remarks, but I will maybe comment a bit more on that. Then, Mayor, if you have any thoughts, feel free to jump in as well. One of the questions or comments from Doug here is that on the communicating the mask ordinance from last week, and I just want to note a couple of things that we've done. We've used all of our channels that we can to communicate this emergency order that council put into place. Obviously, our website, our social media, and our typical channels that we put out there. It's also been on, I believe, every single Denver Metro TV station, a number of pieces that they ran on Golden's mask requirement. And that was an effort that our communications team worked on, and Carlin Tilley, our communications manager, on making sure that word got out broader than Golden. So if you watch any of the channels, you should have seen that on a number of the news segments. And also, one of the things we did the next day, for those who might have missed all of that, is sent out an emergency notification via text message for those who are signed up for that. And I think it went to over 6,000 numbers in Golden, which should have alerted you to the fact that there was an emergency ordinance in place regarding masks. So I do believe that we've communicated that very well, and certainly there are a number of signs out and about in the community. If you're anywhere, you'll see signs that we've put in the public rights of way about masks being required. Any other thoughts or comments, Mayor? Maybe I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it well. It's an ongoing challenge and opportunity to keep trying new ways to communicate. And this particular emergency ordinance, as well as the administrative move to close Clear Creek access, required a much broader push out because many of the visitors to Golden are outside of the city of Golden. And so our traditional communication that goes to residents or businesses here doesn't necessarily reach that audience. So pushing out through all the Denver regional media was one way, but we do know not everybody watches the news or gets the paper anymore. And so it's a continual opportunity to look for new ways to get messaging out. I do appreciate that we had pretty broad coverage in a variety of channels. And the signage that's been put up around town and continues to be updated and replaced really does help get the message across once people get here to Golden, if they somehow missed it before they arrived. But doesn't mean that folks are following the rules, whether they are visitors to Golden or live here in Golden. We know there are individuals who understand that that's the rule and are deciding not to follow it. And so there's communicating, and then there's getting compliance, and then there's enforcement. And all of those things need to happen and continue to ramp up those efforts as we continue to make modifications to the different orders, both for the face coverings as well as creek access.
One of the questions, another question we received ahead of time was from Mike about asking about why can we keep the creek open to recreation and trust that citizens will respect social distancing guidelines? And really, that would be the ideal situation, Mike, in our view. But what I'll tell you is that I think council and staff both have tried that approach from starting back in May of educating first and encouraging first to do the right thing and to social distance and to wear masks. And we did sign campaigns and along the creek as well. And then we went to closing the creek to uses and putting up caution tape, which folks either tore down or ignored. Then we went to handing out masks and giving masks away to both the visitor center and to our local business community. And still we're seeing a lot of just non-compliance or not doing those things that will help the community in getting through this public health emergency. And so now we've had to be a little bit more aggressive in our actions. And some of that, one of that is closing the creek and putting more hardened fencing in place. And another one is an emergency mask order. And we've been acting in response to what we're seeing out in the community, trying first for the softer approach, but one of our goals is we don't want to be in a situation where Golden, Jefferson County, or even our state for that matter, becomes one of those hot spots or contributes to the problem that we're reading about from around the country in these other locations. And we know we have in this summer season, we have a high degree of visitors and tourists come into our community, and we want everyone to be safe, not only the visitors, but our residents as well. Other questions that have come in, Carlin?
Our next question is, will the creek be open on Friday for tubers?
I'm going to say no because, and the reason I'm going to say no is because we're going to try to restore some level of creek access, but I don't expect that it'll be for tubers, and probably not by Friday.
Next question is, we just got
And
several
let me just add to that
questions.
real quick too. One of the things, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but we'll be actually having some conversation with some of the businesses in our community that rent to the tubes and see if there's a way we can collaboratively work on this issue to put forth a plan that would be still allow some access and make it safer. But since it's Wednesday evening, I know that won't happen by Friday.
Can we get signage in place as they have in Breckenridge?
I'd have to see the signage in Breckenridge.
Yeah.
Sure, but obviously we've put lots of signs out. We've ordered hundreds and hundreds of signs all along the creek, and at least 2 of each sign in each park throughout the city, also in the downtown area. The problem is the signs are getting stolen or destroyed, and so we're replenishing them as quickly as we can.
Thanks. And some of the other things that I haven't been up to Breckenridge recently, but they do use variable messaging boards like we do to notify folks as they enter the community. Breckenridge has a little bit of an advantage to Golden, and you get to Breckenridge one of 2 ways. You can enter Golden from a lot of different routes, and so we don't have that singular point where we can put up that big electronic sign and know that we've reached almost everyone who's coming into town. So I do know we have our variable messaging board up that does notify folks of the requirement, but that's not necessarily going to be seen by everybody who comes to Golden.
Next question is, when you go into Summit County, you get a text message informing/reminding you of the mask requirement. That feels helpful for someone who doesn't know local mandates. I guess that's not a question, more of a statement.
Good thought. I'll just say it's a good thought, and I'll see if there's a way that we can do something similar. It may have to come through the county level, and now that they have a mask requirement in place, maybe that's possible. When we did it based on a council's emergency action on Friday. We did it through our JEFCOM 911 center.
We have very frustrating that there are no mandatory mask-wearing signs on Washington. Many groups of people are not wearing masks and not seeing any enforcement. Same as the no smoking policy. Yesterday I was on the path, and then she said, arrest people that jump the fence and break the law. You're allowing people to rule our city.
I can repeat some of the same things I did, and one of I don't know that I have any additional information to share or to respond with, but I will say that one of our, again, this past weekend, one of our approaches was to remind, educate, guide folks, and certainly our police department and park rangers did that through many verbal warnings. But as we go forward, we'll look to change that approach, and if we have to be more of strict compliance, we certainly will.
And I'm not sure where on Washington we don't have signs, but I know I've seen signs, so perhaps they're getting taken.
We'll continue to
Be
replenish
replaced,
those. And
yeah, as they disappear.
additionally, We provided tons of signage for businesses to put up as they wish. So there are opportunities for lots of signs in the area, but we'll keep replenishing those for sure. Just as a follow-up to the Breckenridge, several people have said they put up permanent signs in Breckenridge instead of the temporary signs, which was the difference, I believe, is what they're talking about.
And we certainly can look into doing that as well. One of the things that has been challenging in some of the early months of this pandemic, as things were changing so rapidly, it's hard to make, order, and obtain permanent signage before the next thing changes. So then by the time we receive the sign, it's out of date from what the current situation is. The temporary type signs that we get, they're a little harder stock than paper, but they're easier to get quick turnaround on and get in place quickly. But if we expect that mask mandates will be in place by the county and city for a decent length of time, we certainly can look at the permanent sign route.
An idea for you, why not create a volunteer program to help with gentle enforcement?
I'm all in favor of folks gently reminding visitors and guests and residents to do the right thing. I have one concern, and I know our police department shares this concern, is that this issue, unfortunately, has become such a powerful, divisive point amongst people, political in nature in some ways, in our community, in our state, around the country, that we do have a bit of a concern, and I share the concern of police, that if we put folks in that type of situation and they're not trained to deal with conflict well, that it could be counterproductive. And I just wouldn't want to put someone in that position who wasn't prepared for it. And maybe we can come up with some type of training program where we could guide volunteers who have an interest in this how best to do it. But that is one of the concerns that I know we've talked about in launching a program like that.
Very, very much so. Most of us have probably seen on the news, but we also have stories here in Golden with our businesses, with the reminders that folks need to wear face coverings inside the business, and there being confrontation. And that is a very realistic concern if we were to have volunteers out in the community engaging with folks. Even in the gentlest way, it is not always appreciated by the person who's been approached.
Why was the creek closed, but people can still walk around on a crowded Washington Avenue?
I think that we've tried various scenarios to create additional pedestrian space on Washington Avenue so that folks can walk around and still maintain distancing. The reports from the businesses along Washington and city staff and council members and community members have been that there are not the crowds of people that are preventing distancing from happening. So we continue to look at the need to create additional space along the street. And it's flexible and fluid. We've closed it on some weekends, we've opened it. If there are certain businesses that are creating barriers for folks to be able to walk and have enough space, then that should be sent to the city, because each business has been working with the city to create that additional outdoor space. And if it is preventing safe pedestrian flow, then that definitely should be sent in and can be worked on.
Yeah, and I would just add to that specifically on the creek side, one of the challenges we have is there are limited access points to the creek. Even under normal circumstances, those that are familiar with the corridor will know that we have some permanent fencing in place that protects some of the vegetation along the creek. So there are a limited number of access points along the creek, and what we've been seeing particularly along where the beach is and some other locations, is that when we open it to all uses, tubing, swimming, et cetera, folks tend to gather around those access points, and it's the gathering part that causes us concern. And on Washington Avenue, when we close it and allow people to spread out, we're not seeing the groups gathering, but we are seeing that along the creek. And so if we can find the right balance between allowing access and not promoting the gathering, then we'll certainly do that.
One more question. As we walked along Clear Creek this weekend when parades of tubers were climbing fences to access the creek, the most common language we heard was Spanish. Are you messaging closure in Spanish? And I can help answer that too if.
Go ahead.
We are in the process of getting several of our signs, including the one that you see right there. We're getting those translated properly into Spanish. And once we get that translated, which will be early next week, we will start putting those signs out as well.
Thank you, Carlin. Yeah, it's important that we, as an inclusive community who welcome visitors from many places, and have folks who live here in Golden, who speak many different languages, that we are able to communicate our expectations and our rules in a way that can be understood by all.
I believe that's all the questions we have for now.
I'll just mention, council, when we met last week, we not only discussed the face covering and the emergency ordinance, but we did talk about the creek access and how important it is to be able to have it available for folks to get to the creek. And the opportunity to have some creative ideas, some new ways of doing things is out there. And when we can figure out a way to prevent that crowding, as was said, and provide opportunity for better distancing along our creek corridor, it will be wonderful to open it back up. But its current configuration, we experienced and we saw entirely too many violations of folks not respecting distancing and gathering in too large of numbers to just be able to open it up as it is. And I know that the city manager and city staff are working to vet a lot of those ideas and consider those new ways of doing things along the corridor so that it can be reopened as soon as possible.
And I would only add, Mayor, that's a great summary there. I'd only add the, one of the challenges that we're having, if I'm frank with you all, is that, we're recognizing that many of the other metro area and even our more local area resources for getting in the water, getting in the pool are closed. And it puts added pressure on Clear Creek, especially when the temperatures are approaching 100 degrees outside. We understand that folks want to recreate and they want some relief from the heat and get in the water. But when we have one of the only resources that might be open to folks at this time because so much else is shut down, it does put all that much more pressure on it. And as I said, it's trying to find a way where we can allow some of that access without overburdening the creek and causing a concern.
One more question. Someone asking about using the emergency alert system as you did, saying that Denver overuses it and frustrated with that and wondering if you're going to be using that a lot or if this was sort of a one-time thing.
Yeah, this is sort of a one-time thing, and we're very cognizant about using the emergency alert system in emergencies, in actual emergencies. We wouldn't use it to communicate, ordinary messages, but in our discussion as a management team on this emergency ordinance passed by council, it met that definition of being both an emergency ordinance during a declared local emergency of a public health nature. And so we felt that communicating the mask requirement through that means was appropriate.
And just a final comment that says, thanks for the regular updates and your efforts. That's all we've got from Facebook.
Well, thank you all for logging in, for listening. It's great to have the opportunity to have these live Q&A. It's a challenge not to be able to just have meetings and be in person and get out and see you all. Certainly different than what we would normally do to have a conversation, but really appreciate you checking in and staying informed, and we'll keep giving updates as long as things keep changing. I keep thinking we're going to have a period of a little bit of settling in or calm, but then more things change, so I'm sure we will be back at some point.
Have a good night, everyone. Appreciate you tuning in.
Good night.